Hi, good morning, everyone. You made it to the last session of JNUC, so hopefully you've had a great time. You're feeling okay from last night, but you're in for a treat here. We've got Adam and Adam, who are going to be talking about Tick-Tock tech strategies for maximizing efficiency and timing for macOS with Jamf Pro. So you all know the drill. We'll do Q&A after. I'll do my best to run as quickly as possible to you. We just want to make sure we try to get it in the mic just so that when it's watched later, questions can be heard from the stream. So thank you so much. And Adam, here we go.
Thank you. Everybody, thanks for coming out for last session. We're honored you've been with us. We're going to keep it a little bit loose, but I know we're all still tired from a week and the party and all of that, so thanks for coming out.
Real quick, can we give a round of applause to Ashley? These people are working super hard, so we appreciate what they're doing.
Yeah.
All right, so we are Adam and Adam. We go by a bunch of different nicknames or different ways of getting our attention. You can go by the Adams, Adams Family, Adam Squared. I'm usually Adam, and this is usually other Adam.
Yep.
That works too.
We've worked together with Max at 3 different companies now, so who's first Adam and who's second Adam has changed.
We have the same title. We work for the same company. We live in the same state.
So
we're pretty much the same person.
Yeah. We work for HubSpot, and so this is Tick-Tock Tech, our loosely themed talk about timing, managing Macs with Jamf Pro. We're going to go over some beginner, intermediate, and advanced strategies, and then let us dig into the nuances of smart group memberships, policies, scripts, and some third-party integrations.
And we'll try to keep you awake. I understand that a lot of you were probably at the party last night. If you're on the rooftop, you're probably not here. You might still be in bed, but yeah. So we're going to first jump up to the best slide, in my opinion. And this is the one that you guys usually show up for. So go ahead and scan that if you want now, but you don't need to because we're going to show it again at the end. This will contain all of the scripts and resources that we're going to share with you throughout the presentation. We'll continue to update things as well as we go based off of the questions maybe that we get here at the end. And then if you would like, what we're going to try to do is take a selfie of all of us at the end, but if you don't want to be in the picture, just take off running when this ends and we'll give you some time to get out of here. So. First thing that we're going to talk about is just kind of lay the groundwork here for how things work. A lot of things that we try to do is to automate as much as we can, especially if it's something that we have to continuously click buttons for. But we'll give some examples. Some of those will just be verbal. Some of them will contain scripts. Don't write them down. Don't take pictures. Like I said, we are sharing them with you. So let's talk about static groups. Static groups, ideally, in most simpler environments, are something that you would have to manage manually. They are nice because you can just click a button to add and remove them from the group. But we also use static groups quite frequently with the API, and this is a way that we're able to kind of automate that membership. So in our environment, we like to use some integrations. Tines is a big one, where we can easily add and remove devices based off of certain exit codes or the results of a policy that has executed. And at the same time, if you were to have a policy that, say, has an ongoing frequency, but you really only want it to run one time and only remove it from the static group when it's successful, I think that has become a good workflow for us. So that's probably one of the most common examples that we have when using static groups. A very simple use case for this would be if you want to take a device to run an inventory update. Unfortunately, there's not a button for that under the management tab. So take a policy, have it on an ongoing frequency, scope it to the static group, add in the policy a script that we'll share with you to remove it from the static group when that inventory update is complete. So that way you're only running it once, but you can add that device back to the static group and not have to worry about if there's a previous log there, like a success log, to prevent it from running again in the future. So that's a really simple one. I think that has been really helpful in our environment. Talking about smart groups now, this is something that by design allows you to automate membership. And so typically that's done with the criteria that you set. That criteria can consist of things that already exist within the platform, as well as other criteria such as extension attributes, or things from, I would say, other features like patch management definitions. So we also use the API, though, when it comes to managing some of these memberships. So an example of that in regards to patch management would be if we wanted to change the version number automatically based off of maybe what the latest definition is under patch management. We use an N-1 or an N-7 days type patch management workflow, but we still want to use smart groups so that we don't physically have to go through and touch each device and see which ones are eligible. We'll share an example of that using tines towards the end of this presentation. So one thing that I'll note, and there has been awesome sessions about this already, but because we're last, we kind of get to nitpick on some of these things. There was a presentation by Man Consulting, which is awesome. Watch the YouTube video on that, where they talk about the membership of whether or not a configuration profile is installed or not. That technically does work, but it's not as instant as you would think. So we have a similar workflow where we add a configuration profile to devices that have not checked in for more than, we use 7 days. I think they used 14 in their example. And it's a way for us to identify if the Jamf binary is hanging or not running check-ins on their scheduled basis. But one thing that we noticed is that when we scope that configuration profile, it's installed when we look at the device record, but it still hasn't updated that smart group membership yet. So we have found in those examples that using an advanced search is actually much faster. It's immediate. It checks the membership of every device that has that configuration profile installed. And then we can use something like tines to pull in that information and send, say, a self-heal using the Jamf management framework redeploy.
Yeah, and to be clear, if you do profile name, it will update without a recon. It's just not going to update instantly without a recon.
There seems to be a lag. It seems to be random. Obviously, if the device runs a recon separately at some point on its own, it will update. But for this workflow specifically, if it runs a recon, it's checking in. It no longer is eligible, so it's going to remove that. So just something to keep in mind. All right, and then continuing on with the smart group memberships. So you can use configuration profile or profile name is a good one. Application title or application version is another one that we use quite commonly for membership. We use the patch management software titles for a lot of our patch management workflows, but we don't use the actual patch management to deploy the package. We like to use it just to get an idea of what the latest version is. So that's been a pretty common one. Computer name is another common one that you'll see in a lot of environments. The last enrollment time, I think, is a good one. And then, of course, adding extension attributes is a game changer for us. We use a ton of extension attributes. So a workflow that I'm going to present next here is one that's been really helpful in our environment. Our environment is fairly large-ish, I'll say. I know that like IBM is here, and they probably have the record or something on the amount of devices that are enrolled, but we have close to 10,000 devices in our environment. So we developed a process, and I know this is probably slightly different than some other organizations, but it has worked for us, and it's a slow deployment group process. And what it allows us to do is somewhat scope our policy to everybody eventually. And what that means is that we've created an extension attribute that will randomly generate a number once a day as it continues to check in. And so that way we can scope, say, deployment group or patch group 1 or 2 or 3 or however high you want that number to go. And over the course of time, as that device falls into scope, it will then patch or deploy whatever that policy is. So we will share the script or extension attribute with you if you want to use it in your environment. Feel free to make any changes to it. We use 8 patch groups because it works for us. If you wanted to increase the frequency of that, just add another patch group into that. Or if you wanted to slow it down, just use the least amount as possible. So like I said, it is an extension attribute. That updates during an inventory update, of course, like most other extension attributes that run a script. And it randomly generates a number between 1 and 8. It will not reuse the same number until it has gone through all 8, which is pretty cool. And then it, over time, just how science and math works, it tends to spread itself out evenly. So you can take the amount of devices you have, divide it by 8, and it will come pretty close to that. And then you can also use it in a similar effect to take that same group and exclude it from policies too. So if you randomly wanted to exclude things over time, you can use that workflow too. Please go next. Thank you. All right, so just kind of talking basics about policies and how they work. So policies will typically execute on a scheduled basis, and there's a few different options that you have. One of them that's kind of important, obviously, within your overall system settings for the platform is to make sure that you choose your check-in frequency. So you'll have options for like 15 minutes, or which is what we use, or you can go lower to 5-minute check-in frequency. But within the policy itself, they'll allow you to set something for an ongoing basis, which means it's going to run every time there's a check-in, assuming that it remains in scope. Or you can do once a day, once a week, once a month, if you wanted to extend that. And and then when we talk about policy triggers, you also have the option to set a custom trigger, which is something that we use quite often as well. It allows you to take that, scope it to everybody, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it would be deployed to everybody unless it's called on that custom trigger. It's pretty common and really helpful for us in scripts. So, and then additionally, you can use, which is common in our environment too, is you can use that for multiple scripts. You can use it in multiple use cases. You can use it for self-service and a custom trigger, which is what we tend to do as well. For example, we'll take Google Chrome, which we install on every computer, but we make that our self-service policy that also has a custom trigger, and it allows us in the future, if we wanted to update Google Chrome or reinstall it, we can use that same trigger and call it in a script if we need to remediate maybe some issues over time. All right, and then still within the policies, you have some limitations that you can set as well. You have client and server-side limitations. What you're looking at here is going to be the server-side limitations, and it allows you, theoretically, to activate and deactivate a policy at a scheduled date and time. I've had mixed success with this. This isn't something that we ever really use, but it is nice to have, especially if it's something where it's like, I don't want to work on Sunday, but I want to activate this on Sunday. Or I only want this to run for like the next week, and then I don't want it to run again after that. So this would allow you to do that. And then we also have client-side limitations. And this is something that we actually do use. We're pretty strict about when patching policies are able to run in our environment. We personally use Installator for a lot of our patching policies, but the behavior for Installator, without making any changes to it, is pretty locked down in the sense that we don't want to notify anybody Monday through Thursday, as an example. We only want to notify them on Friday. So we would have a silent policy that would run only Monday through Thursday, and then we would have a policy that would prompt the user only on a Friday. Or we don't want certain policies to execute during working hours, only during off hours, or vice versa. So this is something that we actually use quite often, and it has really helped us in our environment.
Cool. And if you somehow got to the end of JNUC, and this is the first time you've heard about Installator, go look up Installator. It's good stuff. It'll help you out.
Yes. All right, so for the next part of this presentation, I'm going to have Adam talk about inventory updates.
Yeah, so inventory updates, this is the Jamf recon. You can either run sudo Jamf recon in a script or attach an inventory update payload to a policy. So that's going to update everything in that inventory record for your computer on the page. Now, a key difference between running Jamf recon in a script and doing an inventory update payload is, let's say you have 5 policies all running at the same time, and they each have an inventory update payload. Jamf is only going to run the inventory update once. Those are all running off the same trigger. And you can also do, when you call an event with a custom trigger, you can also add the flag force no recon onto that trigger, and then it will skip the recon. So that way, if you have a script that's calling a bunch of other policies, you can have that parent script control when you're going to recon and not have to worry about if there's recons in those other policies. So that's one of the main things about that. Now, also, I'm going to call it that Dan Snelson did a talk about inventory updates. He's very, very smart. So watch the YouTube video on that. I think it happened yesterday afternoon. Also, that the solution to doing inventory updates is not always to do inventory updates more. If you have a large environment and you are doing 20 inventory updates a day per computer, that can actually have effects on your Jamf server, especially if you have webhooks or things that are triggered off of inventory updates. So adding an inventory update to every single policy is not necessarily what you want to do. You really want to just do it strategically when something's going to change. Some also quick tips related to inventory updates is that for like extension attributes, so every time you do an inventory update, every single extension attribute script you have is going to run. So if you have a very involved script gathering information on the computer, you may not want to run that as an inventory update. You could run that as a policy, save the information locally on a plist, and then have the extension attribute just go look at that plist and get the information. An example for this is we actually have a script that looks up the computer in Jamf and sees how many computers are assigned to that user, saves that information locally in a plist, and then we can actually sort computer records based on how many computers are assigned to that user to see who hasn't turned in their old machine yet. But you never want to have an extension attribute that is using an API to get information, because then you're going to hit that API in our environment 7,000 times a day-ish. So really kind of consider that when you're writing your extension attributes. One thing we've also done to reduce and control the number of inventory updates is we all have that daily inventory update policy that runs that's scoped to all clients. We've actually changed that. It's not scoped to all clients. We made a smart group for computers that haven't updated inventory in 24 hours. And that is who our daily inventory update is scoped to. Because if somebody just ran the Chrome update policy and they got inventory update, there's no point in running another inventory update 15 minutes later when nothing's changed. So something regarding custom triggers, again, in inventory updates, is you really just want to do the inventory updates in a script only if something's changed. So in this example script, we're looking to update Chrome, but we only want to update Chrome if it's closed. So we check and see if it's open. If it's open, we just don't do anything. If it's closed, we run the update trigger, and then we run a recon after the trigger. Because if Chrome is open and we're not updating Chrome, why are we wasting server resources, computer time, updating inventory? So some more information on custom triggers. Custom triggers are great for controlling the timing of policies. You can build out that self-service policy with your installer and then call it with a custom trigger, and that way you only have to maintain one policy, and then your update policy, your self-service policy, your initial deployment policy are all calling the same thing, and whenever you want to change the installer, change the workflow, you only need to change it in one place. You can also check to make sure certain conditions are correct before you run a policy. You can put multiple policies on the same custom trigger. If you do that, they run in numerical or alphabetical order, so you can use that to control when you want one thing to happen before another thing. Another great thing you can do with custom triggers is make sure that the conditions are right on the computer before you run a specific policy. So another example with Chrome, if you want to have your Chrome initial preferences file, you want to make sure that you can check to make sure that that file is already installed, and then call the trigger. If it's not, you call a policy to install that file, and then you call your Chrome install policy. With the Chrome initial preferences file, if they open up Chrome one time before that file's there, it doesn't do anything. But that way you can load it, and it'll load preset bookmarks or settings and all of that other stuff. So you really want to make sure that those two things happen in the correct order. And you can also use a similar process to check for, let's say, a configuration profile to make sure that the profile that's going to approve your system extension is already on the computer before you install your security agent that's going to need that system extension. So When you're running multiple policies on the same trigger, there is an important catch you need to keep in mind. So let's say you have a policy that sets Chrome as the default browser, and we just add it to that Chrome trigger so that it runs immediately after Chrome is installed. And we're going to set it once to computer so it only runs the first time. How do we scope this policy? So there's an instinct to say, well, this is going to set Chrome as the default browser, so we just want to scope it to the smart group for computers that have Chrome installed. But if you think it through, if you have a new computer, doesn't have Chrome, it runs the install Chrome custom trigger, that installs Chrome, and now that computer is in the application's Google Chrome installed smart group. But when a custom trigger's run, what Jamf does is it goes and gets a list of all the policies on that trigger, and then it runs those policies in order. It does not update the list of policies it's going to run after it runs the first policies in that group. So even though after that Chrome install policy runs, the computer is now in scope for the Chrome default browser policy in that Chrome installed smart group, that policy is not actually going to get run the first time it runs that trigger because it wasn't in group when the trigger was called. So instead, what you want to do is scope the second policy to all computers, so that way when you run the trigger, it gets called and it will get that second policy. Another thing I want to talk about is policy failure. Policy failure is entirely helpful. Despite Adam saying if you always exit 0, your policies never fail, it really is useful. It helps you see metrics about success rate. It's going to help you find the computers that are hitting errors in your scripts or workflows. One of my favorite features Jamf has added in the last few years is the option to automatically rerun a policy on failure. And this is a great way to make sure that if something goes wrong, the policies try again. However, when you use this feature or policies with custom triggers, it gets a little bit complicated. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. You have two Jamf policies. The first, we have our policy fail example with a custom trigger policy fail. We set it to ongoing, and we have a script that's just the command exit 1. So this policy will fail. We scope it to our test computer. The second policy is run policy fail. Trigger, recurring check-in, execution, once per computer, but we're going to rerun it for 10 attempts. And then we execute the command Jamf event policy fail and scope it to our test computer. So our second policy runs the first policy, that fails. And if the second policy fails, it's going to try again on recurring check-in. Here's the question. How many times does the second policy run? Any guesses? Anyone? How many times? Good guess. That's what you think. Once. It only runs one time because even though the policy it called failed, the policy that ran that custom trigger exits with a success code. The Unix command will be a success code because it successfully ran that Unix command. So if you go look at the logs, you're going to see 100% complete, no failures. And so this is a really great thing to have in your dashboard when your manager walks by, and it makes you look great, but it doesn't actually help you see what's happening on your computers, right? It doesn't help you understand where the problems are in this workflow. But we can't not use the custom trigger because that's amazing. We want to condense our workflows. So there's a script in our GitHub called Jamf policy trigger correct results. This script takes that custom trigger as a parameter. You just drop it in as parameter 4 in the script. It gets the exit code of the script and exits with that exit code. So if you do this results, it will run those 11 times to keep retrying that policy when the policy fails. If you have a policy that all it does is trigger another policy, I'd recommend using a script like this. If you have a policy that is onboarding your computers and runs 50 different custom triggers, I'd recommend making this into a function, which I also have examples of on our GitHub, and using that function to call the custom triggers. And previous side note, in my previous examples on this slide, or in this presentation, where we had a thing called custom triggers, in production, I would actually be using a function like this to do that. So now that we're all on the same page about how cool custom triggers are, wouldn't it be great if you could use them with configuration profiles? So I want to present profile actions. This is a workflow I've developed that gives you a lot of flexibility and control for the installation or removal of configuration profiles and allows you to control that timing similarly to how you can control policy timing with custom triggers. This is all on GitHub. So again, we don't have the specific scripts here, but I want to explain kind of how I got here. So story time. A few years ago, and a different job ago, I was helping troubleshoot a computer with someone from help desk, and their messaging, for some reason, we had pushed our root cert to the computer, and it wasn't trusted, and as a result, a bunch of our other certs weren't trusted either. We were messing with the keychain, tried a whole bunch of stuff, and it just wasn't trusting the cert. Finally, I was like, screw it, and I went to the root cert profile, excluded that computer, wait for it to be removed, removed that exclusion, it reinstalled, and hey, that search trusted, and now the VPN search trusted, and everything's working great, right? A few weeks later, we got another computer doing the same thing. So every once in a while, this would pop up. So I wrote an extension attribute that looked for a file in temp.remove cert profile, and then a script that would just touch that file, do a recon, make sure the profile was removed, delete that file, and do another recon, right? And that worked great. Now, if this random issue pops up, probably did 10 times over the next year, there's a self-service button, solves the problem. Help desk doesn't need to bug me. No one needs to do these random exclusions in Jamf. Things are automated. So I'm like, this is a really cool workflow. A few years later, I have 6 different extension attributes that are looking for 6 different files in this temp folder, and each one is used in 1 or 2 policies. So I built a workflow of 1 extension attribute and a few functions that can get used over and over again. So there is a function, an extension attribute named profile action in the GitHub. The function has a number of commands that can be run with, and it writes text to a log file. The extension attribute looks at that log file and reports the commands back to Jamf. It'll run a command to install or remove a configuration profile, and then updates inventory so that the Jamf updates the extension attribute. There's also option to empty the existing commands, check the existing commands that are already in the log file, and of course, force no recon to help you use your inventory updates responsibly. There's 2 other functions that we have that work great with this: wait for profile install and wait for profile removal, and those do what they sound like they're going to do. So to use this, the third part of the workflow is a pair of smart groups for each profile. Depending on how you're using it, maybe you only need 1 of these smart groups. But we create a smart group to install the profile, and we have the criteria of if profile actions has the install command, or if that profile is already installed. And then we create a smart group to remove the profile, and the criteria is if the profile actions has the remove command. And then we add the install group to the scope, and the remove group to the exclusions. And now you can script installing your profiles. So when should you use this? First, a kind of trivial example. I don't know about you all, but this distribute to all option always makes me a little nervous, especially when a profile is scoped to basically everybody. So this actually can allow an easy way to roll out profile changes in a controlled manner. So an example of this, in late 2023, we pushed out a whole new Jamf Connect profile across the whole company. And after a little bit, the decision was made to change the username field to say email instead of username. Now, none of the functionality changed, just that one word. So I did do a distribute to all, but people were still popping up from help desk saying like, hey, I was helping this user, and theirs still says username, it doesn't say email. And I didn't want to keep doing distribute to all, affecting every computer when I only need to target a small number of computers. So I wrote a script that checks the value of that specific managed preference. If it wasn't right, it would use profile actions, remove the profile, wait for it to be removed, empty the profile actions command, so now it's back in scope, and then a profile comes done automatically. With this policy, I was able to roll out slowly. I used the slow deployment patch group, our deployment groups over the course of a week or 2. It didn't require me to redistribute thousands of profiles unnecessarily, but everyone ended up with the correct profile, even people who were on leave and their computers came back online months later. You can also make a profile default to being installed, but make an optional remove policy in self-service. So for example, I've set up a notification profile. So when you onboarding a new computer and you're installing all your apps, and up in that corner it's going, Chrome wants notifications, Slack wants notifications, Zoom wants notifications. Make a notification profile that approves all of that. But I don't know about you, but I don't actually care what my user's notification settings are. So I make a self-service policy to reset notification preferences, Users can go in, they click that, profile actions, excludes it from the notification policy. They get blasted with everything wants notifications permissions, but now they are in full control of their notifications, and they can set it however they want. So another great example is certificate profiles. So you can write a script to see if the certificate's expired or expires soon. I found this is a little bit more reliable than having a smart group for when certificates expire or expire soon. Profile actions command to remove and reinstall that profile. You can check to see if users are already on the network before you deploy a new network profile to them. Because if they're already on the network, let's not mess with anything. You can also use the security tool to create a keychain item immediately after the certificate profile installs for a network. I found that this can avoid the users getting that EAPOL client prompt when the network certificate is installed into the system keychain. So these are just a few examples of the way that I've used profile actions to better control when my profiles are coming down, when they're being removed, and create a better user experience. So now, other Adam is going to talk about some third-party integrations.
That's actually other Adam, by the way. All right, so I'm going to talk about some integrations. This, if anything, is just more of a resource for you. If you're not familiar with like low-code or no-code platforms that are available, like I said, we use Tines, and it's been amazing for us, especially for pretty much everyone on the team that might not have the same experience that the Atoms do. So check out that if you're interested. Workato is another one that is somewhat similar. Okta Workflows offers some form of automation. There's been presentations throughout this week for AWS Lambda. And then you can use GitHub Actions. But another new one that is what you're looking at in the screenshot is for Jamf Routines. I know it's not available for everybody, but it might be available for you. So just go to jamfroutines.com and see if you can log in. And they have continued over it's been out for a short time, and within that short time, they've continued to add more workflows. So even if you're just simply looking for some form of notification, for example, that a device is now within a smart group, and you want to be slacked about it within a certain channel, or if you use Microsoft Teams for some reason, then you can do that too. Or you want a Jira ticket or something along those lines. Jamf Routines is very simple to use. What it's doing in the back end is it's just creating a webhook for you. You can see the webhook when you go into your Jamf Pro settings, but it's doing all the manual work for you that you'd have to normally do if you were to use something like Tines. So that's a good option for you. Like I said, we use Tines, and I'll show you some examples of how we're using it. I'm not going to show you all the examples because we have some secret sauce, but I'm going to show you some that might help you. So here's one of the options or some of the options that you have when you want to set up a webhook, which is where you'd want to start when you use something like Tines. So I'm not going to read that list, mostly because I can't. I'm at a weird angle. But there are some that are helpful, like when an inventory update has completed, or when a policy is executed, when a computer has been added, which is a good one, so that we can manage the enrollment process for a machine without having to worry about what's being executed locally on the machine.
And one thing about this is you do want to proceed with caution if you're using computer inventory update completed or computer policy finished, especially if you have a large environment, because again, if you have a webhook that's doing a whole bunch of work with your APIs and Jamf servers happening every time a policy finishes, your server might get mad at you.
Yeah.
So proceed with caution on some of these.
Smart group membership change is another one as well, because it gets the webhook gets triggered when a device is added as well as removed. So we do use some automation to take action on a device when a computer is added, but we have duplicated the webhook triggers because, yeah, now we fixed it and it's no longer in the smart group, but it just triggered that to tell us that it's no longer there. So just something to keep in mind. Setting up something like Tines, for example, you can just set up the webhook and just wait to see what comes in, and it will give you an idea of how many events you're going to be dealing with. So yeah, mess around with that. And here's one of my first Tines examples. So one thing that we do, and there is a feature request for this, and it's, to me, weird, but if you set a criteria for when an MDM profile expires, and you set it for, say, less than 0, when it expires, it's not in the smart group. So what you have to do instead is you have to say, if a MDM profile has expired before today, then let me know. And it's a way for us to track to see, like, for some reason, did the automatic renewal not work for that MDM profile? And so this is literally a one action, the simplest times workflow that we have, where every single morning it updates a smart group criteria with today's date. And like you can see there, it just runs on a schedule, so that's the little clock in the top right corner of the action. We also use it for our Okta cert. We had found out, unfortunately, for 2 years straight, that if a configuration profile is unable to view the full identifier, the setting to automatically renew that will actually not work. And so we had a bunch of Okta certs that unfortunately expired. And so as part of monitoring that, you can't see if the cert has already expired without using that before date. And so we also update that smart group as well to let us know anything that has already expired. Obviously, we do additional tracking as well. Let us know when it's within 30 days or even 7 days, and then we set it up with other workflows to use the alarm emojis and stuff like that in Slack because it's a big deal. So that's the simplest, like, get started with something like that if you're going to use something like Tines or some other option. Just start simple, and it can help kind of like bridge that gap for some of the feature requests that we're waiting on being completed. So another example that we have is for patch management. So we have a patch management smart group that we use. And the example that I'm showing is just for Google Chrome, but this works for really any application. Google Chrome is important for us because I don't know if you went to one of the Jamf app installer sessions earlier this morning. It can release a new version like 3 times, 5 times a week, like whenever they feel like it. Like someone clicks a button, new version. And so we don't really care about N-1 as much. We obviously want to make sure that we resolve it before it falls out of our SLA. But we do want to make sure that we can track everything within a period of time. So for Google Chrome, we have a N-1 week, essentially. And typically that happens to be N-1. In some cases, when they get more aggressive with updates, it can be N-3. But it still prevents us from constantly bugging our users that there's an update available, and it gives them essentially a week before they get their next notification when they have to update. So web browsers, I would say, is the most common example for a lot of this, where we use a specific day for how long we're allowing it to not prompt the user. In most other cases, we'll use something that would be more of a N-1 or N-2, depending on the frequency or how often we see vulnerabilities with those applications. So here's another example. This is our N-1 example. And how this is actually working is we're just using the patch management API to gather this information. Obviously, there is math involved with the N-7 days. But for N-1, we're just taking index 0, and we're looking for index 1 instead. And so you do have to set up the patch management title for that. You can use it with title editor as well for your other titles that you've created yourself. But it gives us a simple and automated way, something that we can run on a scheduled basis to do the work for us. It will update the smart groups with the version that we care about so that everybody falls within scope. I don't recommend doing this if you are using the Jamf app installers, because what it's going to do is when it falls out of scope, sends an MDM command that might overwhelm your environment. When it comes back into scope, now you're restricting auto updates, and it's just a bad experience. So if you're using something, though, like policies with packages or Install-O-Mator like we do, this works great for our environment. Another example of a Tines workflow that we do is sending the Jamf binary health check MDM command. So similar to the presentation that Man Consulting did, we have a similar workflow. But instead of waiting for smart groups, we instead search an advanced search. And we do that every single morning. So this runs on a daily basis. And it checks to see any device that has our APNS health check profile installed. And it would show up in the advanced search. And then we check to see if we have already sent that command before determining if we need to send it again or for the first time. And it goes through the entire list, and it will send the APNS binary health check redeploy API call. So this has helped automate, obviously, keeping devices online and making sure that the binary is healthy and functioning properly. All right, so here is the QR code again, and we're going to open up the floor for Q&A. I understand that we didn't really have an agenda. We just want to make things more efficient in your environment. So feel free for any of your questions to kind of go away from what we showed you. If you just want to know how we do things, that is fine. It looks like we have about 5 minutes for questions, and then we'll hang out here on the side before I exit for the airport. But we're going to take a picture too, so take off running in 5 minutes if you don't want to be in it.
All right, who's got questions?
Cool. We're just going to do a quick selfie now then.
All right.
I promised my 8-year-old I'd take a selfie on stage.
Yeah, so now you're famous for an 8-year-old.
Yep.
All right, cool. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it. I hope everybody had an amazing JNUC. We also did.
Yeah, it's a great time.
If you go to, that is our GitHub, well, it's his GitHub, but if you look at the README, there's direct links to how to reach us if you feel like doing that. Don't reach us, though, until like Monday, because we're exhausted.
Yep.
So anyways, we'll hang out here. Thank you, everyone.
Yep. Thank you so much for coming. Have a
Have a good day.
Yep.